morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always, told how to voice the radio. So today I am here to tell you about, and I feel pretty confident using this phrase, the weirdest new Pokemon deck we've seen in a long time. And when I tell you that the only Pokemon player there's a 4 of is Comfey, you're going to go, oh, okay, Wassy, I get it. We're talking about the Comfey from Lost Origin. It's the Lost Zone Comfey. It's got flower selecting. Let's look at the top 2 cards of your deck, and one goes in your hand, and one goes in the Lost Zone. You build up your Lost Zone, you use stuff like Sableye and Cramorant, but then I'm sure there's some other attackers in there as well. That's cool, Wassy. But that's not a particularly weird deck. You're right. Not that Comfey, ladies and gentlemen. Not that Comfey. There is another Comfey which is coming around, and somebody's gonna want a tournament with it over in Japan. Now, very much worth remembering that at the moment when we're talking about Japanese tournaments, they're quite small, they're quite local tournaments, so I'm not going to come here pretending this is going to won some giant event and it's a new best deck in the format, but I am here telling you that there is a new Comfey deck. It is at least got a lot of potential. It has gone and won a little tournament over in Japan. And it is one that we might need to actually take seriously. And it is the new Comfey that is Stellar Miracle over in Japan, Stellar Crown over here. And I'm going to be honest with you, it's kind of a fun Comfey. Now, what we've got is an attack, single energy, 20 damage, flip a coin, if heads, 20 more damage. Not that one. But for a single energy, both players draw 3 cards. And that's the deck. Okay, there's actually a lot more to the deck. But largely, that's the deck. Your goal here is basically making your opponent draw their entire deck, and then they lose and they deck out. Now, there's an obvious downside here, okay? There is a very obvious downside, and I'm going to be the one to say it. If you make your opponent draw their entire deck, well, they're going to be drawing what they need a lot of the time. You're going to be letting them draw enough cards to actually set up, and that's a little bit of a pain. So the rest of the deck is basically built around trying to make sure that giving your opponent access to all the cards they need is not actually going to let them win the game. So what we need to do is let them have a big hand and then go after it. Although I do need to mention, it's very important, if you let them have a big hand, you can go after it next turn, but obviously they're drawing 3 cards at the end of your turn. So what have we got? Well, we've got a couple of cards here which are tailor-made for going after your opponent's large hand. One of which is the rarely played Hand Trimmer. But this is like the perfect deck for Hand Trimmer. It is an item card that says each player discards cards from their hand until they have 5 cards in their hand. So you get them to a big hand size, then you play Hand Trimmer. Yes, your opponent will on their turn be able to try and go below 5, and actually play the cards rather than fall into this, but if they get a big enough hand, this could be fun. But also, they choose what gets discarded, so you kind of need to bear that in mind. Your opponent is getting the choice of what gets discarded, and they will be able to essentially keep the things they really need. If you want a more aggressive version of essentially the same card, how about the new Roto-Stick? Because the new Roto-Stick comes in and says that your opponent discards cards until they've only got 3 cards in their hand. Oh, yeah, that'll do. That'll do quite nicely. I don't actually have an English version of Roto-Stick, but I can tell you it's called Roto-Stick's Machinations. We learned that from the new Malamar. So we've got these couple of cards. So if your opponent ends up with a large handful of cards, you basically go and wreck them with this. That sounds like a pretty good idea. But we've got a bunch of other things we can do as well. So in terms of Pokemon, yeah, we're playing Mimikyu. Mimikyu sits in the active and blocks your opponent. You're going to give up some prizes in this deck. That's fine. It's inevitable. But your goal here is to give up a few prizes and then lock your opponent down, force them to keep drawing 3 cards a turn with Comfey, but to the point where they've now just got no more options, they don't have enough cards, and then from there they lose. Speaking of which, we've also got Morile here. Now, Morile doesn't actually block and prevent damage like Mimikyu does, but what Morile does is it's got Tempting Trap, brings a Pokemon into the active, and it says they take 90 more damage from attacks next turn. That's irrelevant. You're not going to... I mean, okay, fine. You can actually at this point do 130 with Comfey, but no, that's not what we're doing. What we're actually doing is attaching the new tool card. This is going to be a deck where if you play it, your opponent will be reading some of the cards. Unless they've watched this video, of course. The new tool card is Gravity Stone, and what it does is when it's attached to a Pokemon in the active, both active Pokemon pay 1 more to retreat. So you bring them active with your Morile here, but you've got Gravity Stone attached, so in theory they're not able to retreat. And then they're stuck in the active, and then round and round we go. Of course, you'll also be wanting to put Gravity Stone onto your Comfey, and given that you're going behind on prizes here, we're playing Counter Catcher. We're not playing Other Gusting, it's Counter Catcher here, because this is a deck where you're going to be behind on prizes. You're not going to waste your supporter Gusting. You're not going to waste other spots in your deck. You're just going to go, the second my opponent takes a prize, I'm behind on prizes for literally the entire game. Counter Catcher just becomes item-based gusting. That sounds fine by me. So you're gusting them in the active, you're trying to keep them in the active. And we're playing Keep Away. Obviously, Crushing Hammer gets played as a full playset here, trying to get rid of your opponent's energy. That's pretty gosh darned important, frankly. And there is another item card here that you are probably going to need to read. Because I'm willing to bet most of you have forgotten this card exists. And I wouldn't blame you, it's not got an English release. It was a promo card that came around in April. It's not found its way to an English release yet. Presumably at some point we will, but it came around in the promo pack with Mask of Change. To be fair, so did Kilowatt EX, and we haven't got that one yet. It's quite a new card. So I wouldn't be too upset that we haven't got this. I assume we'll get it at some point in the near future. But right now, we don't have it, and I'm willing to bet most of you forgot what it did. But it's called Roto-Stick, and it lets you look at the top 4 cards of your deck and find as many supporter cards as you like and pop them into your hand. Very, very nice, because of course, we're going to be playing some Disruption supporters here. Yes, we're playing Arven, which is pretty important for finding our pieces in the early game. And I've already told you that we're playing Roto-Stick Scheme to try and get rid of your opponent's hand. But there are a couple of other supporters we need to be having a look at here, which are going to help to annoy our opponent. And that is a goal of this deck. We are trying to annoy our opponent. So obviously, Airy is getting a bunch of play here. Really good card in this particular deck, because you get to discard 2 item cards from your opponent's hand. That's a good thing. Because in theory here, yeah, stuff like Roto-Stick Scheme and Hand Trimmer are going to make your opponent get lower on hand size, but you do need to have a way to actually go after the better cards. This is what's going to do it. This is going to be the supporter card that goes, yeah, that's going to help you out in the future. Now it's mine. Now I'll play Hand Trimmer, but I know you're not going to be able to keep the 2 cards you'd really want to keep because I've already gotten rid of them. Misfortune Sisters, very similar kind of thing here. Lets you look at the top 5 cards of your opponent's deck and discard any item cards you find there. Really good for getting rid of item cards from their deck before they even get into them. Something like a switching card or something along those lines would work very, very nicely here. And then we've also got Silene, which isn't necessarily disruptive per se, but it is really good for recovering cards. And of course, you know, we've got some annoying cards here we might want to recover. Having a card that will allow you to recover them sounds like a fairly sensible plan. And then we get to the Ace Spec. And the Ace Spec in this deck seems way more important than the Ace Spec in most decks. It's obviously neutral center. It has to be neutral center. I don't think the deck really works without it. I could be wrong. Now, it's an Ace Spec supporter card in a deck that doesn't take prizes. That's a bad thing. Because if this is prized, I think your deck gets infinitely worse. Basically, neutral center's the one that says your non-rule box Pokemon do not take damage from Pokemon EXs and Pokemon Vs. So in theory, you disrupt your opponent, get them late in the game, they've taken 4 or 5 prizes, then you drop this down, and your opponent can't take the last prize and you win. It seems awkward because if it's prized, you're in a bit of trouble, and if your opponent's got an answer, you're in a bit of trouble, but it does seem like it's going to be very good in this deck. Also, because you're playing a deck-out deck, as standard, I should mention, you are playing Pidgeot V. Pidgeot V is the I'm never decking out card. Basic Pokemon that if it's on the bench, you can shuffle it and all cards attached to it into your deck. So if you get late into the game and you're both on the verge of decking out, you can essentially draw Pidgeot, play Pidgeot, put it back into your deck, and then next turn you draw Pidgeot, play Pidgeot, put it back in its deck, and round we go, making sure that you never actually deck out, your opponent does deck out, and you win the game. Here's a list as a whole, and this deck makes me nervous. I could never play this deck at an event. This is not my kind of deck. It seems like making your opponent draw a whole bunch of cards rather than milling could backfire, and certainly it does seem very reliant on neutral center. But I'm telling you that it went and won at least one event over in Japan. There is something here, and it is the weirdest deck I've seen in a very long time. So I thought we should have a chat about it. And now we have. So now it's over to you guys. Tell me what you think about this deck. Tell me if you think it's got potential. Tell me if you think it's a bit too much of a gimmick. Go nuts in the comment section, but be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi. That's where we talk about Pokemon and a whole bunch of other card games. And please do consider checking out patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can support the channel, get some bonus podcasts, join a Discord, and all kinds of fun things. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.